It is the Everton Byline here, hosted by the Blue Room. This is episode 7, and we are still waiting for our first Premier League win, first Premier League point to get excited about. I am Matt Jones, host here at the Blue Room, and editor of the Liverpool Echo. And joining me, Paddy Boylan from The Athletic. Paddy, I've run out of ways to start this in a different way, but how are you after the weekend?
I'm just tired. I'm sure everybody else is, but it's been a pretty draining start to the season, all things considered. Can only imagine what it must be like for the manager, the coaching staff, and the players, by the way. It just feels like we spoke last week, didn't we, about it being too early for this to be considered a crisis, and I still stand by that. But like the noise around Everton at the moment is it's still pretty extreme. It's still pretty severe.
I don't know, I feel like if you lose, I know they're very different, 3-2 losses, but if you lose back-to-back games, 3-2, haven't been 2-0 up, and obviously the one at the weekend is not as bad as the Bournemouth one, I don't think, but I don't know, that feels very crisisy to me. I feel like we're on the precipice of going into that threshold if we're not in there already.
Well, I think, as I was saying last week, I think in the eyes of some, Everton are already there and probably have been for a while. I look at my own notifications, my own messages, and my own podcast and radio requests, and they've risen exponentially because Everton are considered the story. It was a different kind of 3-2 to the Bournemouth game. I think that the Bournemouth game was a real shock to the system and happened in rapid fire. But this was kind of long and drawn out. It was like a car crash in slow motion. Where, I mean, even though Everton were 2-0 up and had done well to take the chances at 2-0 up, they didn't ever really feel in control of that game. The goals seemed to come a little bit out of the blue after a pretty strong opening to the game for Aston Villa. And then I turned around to colleagues in the press box at 2-0 and said, this will finish 3-2 or 4-2 to Aston Villa, because I didn't have any faith in them whatsoever holding out.
Yeah, like the way I sort of describe it is like Bournemouth was like popping a balloon with a pin, whereas the weekend was like letting the air out the balloon at the bottom and just watching it slowly deflate. Like
it's like you know when you get one of those dodgy mattresses.
Yes.
And
yeah.
And then you wake up the next morning and you find actually you're just lying on the floor at that point, because it's over the course of the however long you're sleeping, over the course of the evening, it just slowly started to lose air. It's a little bit like that for me. I didn't give Everton much chance, in truth, against Aston Villa. I think there was always a sense that this was going to go and get worse before it got better. But I just think the nature of the defeat, like if they'd lost 3-2 and had been 3 goals down and had mounted a bit of a comeback, and we'd seen something from a few players that made us think that they could carry a bit of momentum into the next game, then yeah, that's great. But context is everything here. The way they squandered another 2-goal lead, I think just strikes to the core of the issue here, which is a real fragility, a real vulnerability about the side. And I wrote in my match piece, written on Saturday, published on Monday, that kind of Dyche on the tin is the guy that creates these solid, strong, kind of mentally tough to beat sides, or that's what he's meant to do. But Everton are the polar opposite of that right now. They just look so vulnerable and so fragile. And I know we'll get onto this in a minute, but I think it goes beyond merely the absence of Jared Branthwaite. Jared Branthwaite's a huge loss, don't get me wrong. I think he comes in and he improves things more or less instantly if he's fit. But I think you're doing a massive disservice to the overall situation if you just look at Branthwaite. I think there's far more going on.
Yeah, we will get into that, like I said, in our free topics this week. Just before we do start, I just wanted to say to everybody, actually, we've had so much nice feedback about this podcast over the course of the last fortnight. I just want to say thanks to everybody who's got in touch and has said they're enjoying it. It has been a bit of a slog to get going, but hopefully that first win is not far off. So we appreciate the support. If you could hit like, hit subscribe, and leave us a comment on what you think if you're watching us on YouTube. If you are listening on iTunes or Spotify, please leave us a rating, please leave us a review. They all help get us through these tough early weeks of the campaign.
Maybe we're the problem, Matt. Maybe we're the problem.
We are. Yeah, the Everton. Do you know what, Paddy? At the weekend, so people who listen to us regularly know my NFL team's the Colts. They've lost their first 2 games of the season as well. And the 2 NFL fantasy leagues I'm in, I've lost both games. So I'm cumulatively over the course of the first whatever weeks of the Premier League and NFL crossover, I think I'm 0-8 in terms of wins and losses.
You've got some bad.
What I would want to happen.
You've stored up some really bad sporting karma. Like in a previous life, you probably followed the Patriots and Man United.
Yeah, that's bad.
That's the only thing I can think of.
But so it's not been a great sport in a few weeks, really, from that point of view. But listen, we'll press on anyway, and we'll go into our first topic. And we had a chat about the game a little bit there, but obviously a lot of focus on the manager afterwards, Paddy. I was sort of saying to Dave after the game on Saturday on our instant pod that it feels like the Bournemouth game and the Villa game combined are probably enough to properly, fully change people's opinions, to put them over that threshold of not necessarily wanting them gone, but not really being too fussed if he was to go. We've spoken about the merits of that on previous podcasts, but just wanted to sort of get your view really on, as we stand right now, is there much chance of that happening? And obviously we had sort of a bit of a vote of confidence come out last week from the club in terms of the manager, and that can be a foreboding sign sometimes. But as far as you're aware, as far as what you think, do you think we're anywhere near that point yet?
Yeah, I mean, so going back to the international break, I think I wrote in the first week of that, very early in the first week of that from what I've been told, Dyche would be given time to put this right. And I don't yet get the sense, I haven't yet picked up on the sense that anything dramatic has changed in light of Saturday's game, despite how it happened and the concern over the start of the season. I think we have to go back to a lot of the issues we've discussed previously here, and probably not much appetite inside the club right now for yet another managerial change, given they feel as though they've made too many over the years. Probably not much money to make a change when you consider how skint they are, in effect. We're in the middle of a takeover transition, and we still don't know for sure whether a takeover will even happen. And I think when you're in an ownership transition, often those big decisions are just kicked further on, aren't they? They're kicked down the line. I always believe that the biggest, boldest changes come after regime swaps, after regime changes. And we'll probably go on to talk about John Textor's comments on Dyche later. Sure, everyone's got their own views on those, and I've got plenty myself. But I think that's when you really start to look at Sean Dyche. Right now, I'm not sensing much desire to change, rightly or wrongly. But this is a club that just A, doesn't have much money, and B, doesn't see the value in making loads of changes unless absolutely necessary, given the mistakes that have been made in the past. I also think that Dyche did have a lot of credit in the bank for last season. The way he managed the 2 separate points deductions and everything that came with them has increased his stock in the eyes of some at the club, and would buy him time anyway as a result. So most people will look at this and go, yes, four games in, 4 really poor results, and often in most of those games performances. But will he have enough to turn this around? I think probably at the moment the feeling is that that they should improve. But let's see. Let's be quite honest here. They need to start picking up some points. You've already alluded to the fact there that people's opinions start to shift on these games because of how big and dramatic and important they are. Opinions can shift very quickly, and I only have to read comments on social media now, and I only have to read comments on my articles on The Athletic to see that people are disgruntled. Fans are really disgruntled, and I get why, because as we've said, it's not been a good start. They probably had in the 4 games so far, they had 45-ish good minutes, despite being 1-0 down against Brighton, and then a good stint against Bournemouth. But there's been loads of bad in there, and while you can point to players being unavailable and everything else, I just think you've got to plough on with the resources at your disposal. You've got to find a way to be competitive in the Premier League. Otherwise, you get to this point where you just don't pick up results. So this has been a tough block. Objectively and subjectively, it's been a tough block. Villa and Tottenham away. Everton may have gone their full strength and lost anyway. Brighton, I think, are much improved and invested heavily. The Bournemouth one's the real nagging concern, because that was a winnable game and it was thrown away. But this block coming up, more or less until the start of December, it's full of games that on paper are more winnable. And that's where we have to see Dyche and the players find solutions, start to pick up results. I mean, he said pretty candidly after the game that everyone has an opinion on what we can do to change things, but it's much harder when you're there in the situation yourself. And fair enough, I do tend to agree with that to some extent. But then he also admitted that he hasn't found enough of the right answers so far. So it's probably the most honest and candid he's been so far after 4 games, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's what I was going to sort of ask you next. And obviously, the people listening to this and watching this who will see the odd press conference and see the odd bit he says after the games and stuff on maybe Sky or whatever. But having watched, I think, pretty much all his pre-match ones this year, you obviously would have been in a lot of them, been a lot of afterwards. I think sometimes you can get painted as you know what he's going to say. You can sort of write the quotes a little bit beforehand and all that. But I don't know. It feels to me like there's been quite a distinct change actually in his attitude and the way in which he's addressed some of the questions around Everton. It feels like he's talking a lot more about the broader issues of the football club. It feels like he's much more. It feels like he more frequently will bring up things going on with the ownership, stuff with the squad, transfers, etc., etc. But I think in the past shows we've spoken about, maybe he's gone into self-preservation mode a little bit. And at times, and I don't know if this is just because we're not playing well and we're not getting results. He just seems like he's in a bit of a mood to me, for want of a better phrase. And it feels like, I don't know if he's maybe aware that he's probably not going to be beyond the end of the season anyway. And listen, we've not really heard anything conclusive on that, really. But his contract's up, obviously. You sort of feel like if they were going to give him a new contract, it would have been at the end of last season after, when the feel-good factor around him and the job he'd done was very high. It feels like he's going to be moving on at the end of the season anyway. I don't know if he feels maybe a bit undervalued, and I don't know if he feels a bit pissed off about the ownership situation not being solved, but I don't know, it just feels like he's gone into his shell a little bit more. It feels like he's deflecting quite a lot more, actually, than he was at times last season. And like I said, Paddy, for want of a better phrase, he just seems like he's in a bit of a huff to me. I mean, is that something that's come across to you when you've been sat there sort of looking at the whites of his eyes?
I think he always has a pretty acute eye on what's going on, how it impacts him, and then how that should be communicated to the fans through the media. Even last season, there was so much talk. I mean, if I think back to Dyche buzzwords over the past 12 to 18 months, probably the biggest one is the noise around the club. That's been an ongoing thing for him, an ongoing comment or phrase throughout his tenure. And we've obviously had more of that this season. I do wonder if a sense of more or less collective fatigue has set in now. Like these players and this manager have been dealing with some of these issues and probably expecting resolutions in some of them for an awfully long period of time, and seemingly can't seem to dig themselves out of the hole they found themselves in. And whenever they seem to turn a corner, they for whatever reason lapse back. That must be draining. I also think we need to look at the situation he's in, where he is effectively, apart from the odd set of program notes from Kevin Thelwell or the odd hastily written statement as we got last week from interim CEO Colin Chong, he is in effect the only real interface with the media and with the fans. He's the one that speaks every week, before games, after games.
Is that not just a part of the job though for every manager to an extent?
It's the part of the job for every manager in the UK. Obviously, it's very different in Italy and certain other leagues where the sporting director speaks much more often.
Well, I just look, sorry to interrupt you again, but I just look at, like, you know, I've seen this said a lot about Dyche, but like the last few weeks I've looked at Guardiola, who's having to answer questions pretty much every week about City's 115 charges. You've got other managers who are asked similar things. You know, Steve Cooper's been asked the last few weeks about what's going on at Leicester.
Not many have had the Everton news. Not many.
No, but like I feel like even like Eddie Howe is like consistently asked about like the Saudi human rights record. And like it feels like just now, like that's just, you know, wherever you went to an extent, maybe not to quite the same extent as us, but you would have to deal with that a bit, and you are ultimately the spokesperson for the club because you speak to the media the most.
Well, also that is just a fact of modern life and modern football. We speak a lot more about PSR and legal issues and geopolitical issues in Eddie Howe's case than maybe ever before. And let's be honest, some managers will be more cut out for that than others. Where I think there's been a bit of a problem so far this season, I've not sensed a massive shift in how he apportions or doesn't apportion blame. I think on the whole, he speaks a lot about mistakes, individual mistakes in the squad and things like that. And that hasn't changed massively for me. Where I think there has been a perceived issue is maybe around the way some of his quotes, either when you see them, when he's speaking on TV, or when it's written down from press conferences, how those quotes are perceived and taken by fans. And I mean, he said during the week that he feels as though some of them have been misconstrued. I think he's talking about the opening day of the season. But even in that Aston Villa post-match press conference, he spoke at one point about being hammered by fans for saying that in football, that the ultimate goal is to keep the ball out of the net at one end and score at the other. It feels as though and there's an awful lot about how fans perceive that Everton were going to be in Europe this season because it was last year at Goodison. I don't think any of that's particularly relevant, to be honest. I didn't know anybody. We spoke about it at the time. I didn't know anybody that thought would be in Europe. The comments after Villa about what happens at both boxes, maybe just a bit flippant. I don't think fans want to hear that, basically, because I think what a fan probably wants a little bit more of is an honesty, an admission that, look, things are going wrong. And he did, to be fair to him, he did say the buck ultimately stops with me as the manager. But maybe a bit more thorough analysis of what's going wrong and why and what can be done to solve it. I mean, Dyche said that he felt that the tactical setup was working well in the main on Saturday. And he said that the big turning point is Dominic Calvert-Lewin at 2-1. I have to be honest, Matt, I don't think the tactical setup was working that well, because I think Aston Villa were getting through far too easily and could have scored 4, 5, 6. But I also think, even if Calvert-Lewin had scored at 3-1, would you have backed them to hold out?
Absolutely not. No.
I wouldn't. So we're sort of skirting around the issues with regards to what's going on and the defensive solidity or lack of it. I mean, I've asked him now for the last two weekends. I've asked him last 2 game weekends. I've effectively asked him, how can this team have become so leaky so quickly? I feel as though history just keeps on repeating itself, and we're kind of having to ask him the same things. And he talks about injuries. He talks about individual mistakes. But at what point do we look at it and say, well, if Jared Branthwaite is the only player really that's missing here from the defence, why is a system, even if he is so important, why is the system so heavily reliant on him? Why can there be no other way when he's not there? Because I would find that quite concerning. And what else is going wrong around the pitch for it to be exposed in this way? Because I saw loads of things in that game on Saturday. I saw Villa stationing Luca Dean really high on the left, almost playing in behind Everton's fullbacks because they knew they could all day. So Morgan Rogers drifting inside, in behind Tim Irabunam in midfield. I saw Yuri Tielemans completing 34 passes into the final third, which is an absolutely ludicrous number, by the way. Like I flagged that in our channel during the game, in one of our internal work channels during the game, and said, like, this number looks ridiculously high to me. Provided it's correct, can we contextualize this? What's it like compared to other things? Well, for a start, it's the highest number in the Premier League this season in that metric. And it already equals the highest number from last season in that category, just 4 games in. What does that stat tell us? 34 passes into the final third from Aston Villa's arguably most creative central midfielder. It tells us that Everton are too easy to play through in those central areas. And to play into the final third. So that strikes me as something that's wrong. It strikes me that Everton are not screening the defence adequately enough.
Well, it shows, doesn't it? Like, it's failing on 2 counts, because either you're not getting close enough to Tielemans to stop him getting the ball frequently in those areas, which, that's fine. If you don't want to press out because you're worried about the spacing behind Watkins and Rodgers, like, I get that. So fine, you don't want to press out to the midfield. Get in your shape, get compact, and stop those passes coming into those dangerous areas. And then, so you're not pressing him, so he's getting the ball loads. But then also, when you're sat in your shape, there's gaps everywhere for him to thread the passes through.
You have to be compact. You have to be. If you set that deep, you have to be compact. But there are also ways, as we all know, there are ways of making sure that the opposition's deepest line midfielder doesn't have just unfettered access to passes into midfield and everything else. Like, in theory, Everton's number 10, whether it's Dwight McNeil, Iliman Ndiaye, or Abdoulaye Doucouré, has to be getting close to a player like Tielemans as well. So I actually think it's both of those things. Not only are they close enough to Tielemans, but they haven't been compact within the admittedly deeper shape this time. They played a different game. They didn't press high. They sat deep. I think Aston Villa had about 74% of the ball.
And that's where you're right about. I think you're right about Branthwaite in the sense that I don't think this lad coming back in, it's not going to be a plug in and play situations where Everton are suddenly better when he comes in. Because if you actually take a proper look at that team, and you just sort of touched upon it there, I think it's quite obvious why the last couple of games in particular we've looked so defensively fragile towards the end. Because if you're taking out Doucouré, go back to last season, and you think about the bedrock of that defence and solidity of getting those 5 wins at home. Listen, Doucouré not started the season well at all. Totally get why he's come off the team. But if you swap in for McNeil, what you might get from McNeil going forward in possession, you lose something in terms of pressing and you lose something in terms of shape and getting close to that deep line midfielder, like you said there. Because Doucouré is quite good at that. And I think that's why the managers like them. So you're losing something defensively there in that position. And the other one is Irabunam for James Garner. And Irabunam started the season well. He's clean and show what he's all about. He's gifted. I think he's a good ball carrier. Way to pass is really nice. All these things. I'm not having like a massive go at the lad. But you saw against Bournemouth and you saw at the weekend that defensively, again, you lose something. And I'm not saying James Garner's just got like colossal defensive midfielder who wins loads of tackles and, is a dual winning monster necessarily. But I think he's a lot cuter and a lot smarter in that area of the pitch and where to be and how, and I think he's obviously got a better understanding of Idrissa Gueye. So there's two positions in addition to not having Branthwaite where you're weaker defensively straight away. And I think that's where and that's where you look at it and you say, all of a sudden at the weekend, you can see why Villa were so keen to condense the play, really narrow, I think, at times midfield, and then spring it out wide to Luka Dean, because we were like scrambling all over ourselves to try and get near their plays in the middle. And then all of a sudden the space was that wide, wasn't it, all the time? And that's the, it wasn't too dissimilar to what we did when we were talking about James Rodriguez a few weeks ago, where he came off the line, made the extra man in midfield with Alan, Decore, and Gomez or Sigurdsson, whoever it was, and then you'd make the space out wide with Dina making that run. That's effectively what Villa did so well at the weekend. I think the other big selection, we strayed into second point here about actually distinguishing it, but it is team selection and what's going on there. Obviously, we've spoken about all those issues in the team. I think the big one, Paddy, which is sort of reared its head a little bit coming off the weekend, is Keane O'Brien, isn't it? Because I think O'Brien, when he came in, I think we all sort of assumed he'd be third choice. He maybe will take a bit of time to be bedded in. All these things. But it looks a little bit like Everton might have spent around £15 million on a fourth choice centre back at the moment, which, given our finances, given the options we've got there currently, I don't know, for a club that's got to kind of live hand to mouth, got to live a little bit of a short-term basis at the moment for a variety of reasons, be it the stadium, be it PSR, all these sorts of things. I don't know, it's very early, but it's not looking like the most sensible move, especially when you look at areas of the squad like fullback, and we seem very, very light.
Yeah, I think this is obviously a recruitment pick, Jake O'Brien. He was admired in January. And I'm not saying Dyche was against the sign. I have no evidence to suggest that whatsoever, by the way. I'm sure everything gets run by him and he was happy with the signing. But we know from history, and Dyche's history in particular, that he tends not to build up an immediate level of trust with new signings. And that his preference as ever is for Premier League experience, Premier League proven players. And that's what he sees in Michael Keane. I think we're in quite a unique situation. We were in quite a unique situation over the summer in that Branthwaite was injured. O'Brien came through the door later on. And Tarkowski wasn't always playing. So Michael Keane actually played loads in pre-season. And from what I'm told and from what we've heard from the manager, even after the first game, when I asked him about Keane v O'Brien, they felt that Keane had a really good pre-season. And that was another reason why he was thrown into the squad for the first game. I wasn't surprised at all by that. It really didn't surprise me. And it still doesn't surprise me, by the way, that this manager, knowing what we know about him, goes with Michael Keane over Jake O'Brien. Where we're probably going to get to here is that when somebody eventually replaces Michael Keane, it won't be Jake O'Brien. It'll be a fit again, Jarrad Branthwaite. And you do have to wonder what happens to somebody like O'Brien if Everton go out of the cup early, because what we would expect to see on Tuesday is him getting in, hopefully, 90 minutes against Premier League opposition. He takes another step on in his journey towards kind of full Dyche Premier League match fitness, and he starts to look like he can compete for minutes in the manager's eyes. But if Everton go out of that cup competition and Jarrad Branthwaite's back, then you might not see him straight away. He is seen as a project. He's not seen as the finished article right now. He's seen as somebody who can contribute and was signed as somebody who can contribute, but as somebody who, in effect, they believe can go on to become one of Europe's top centre-backs over the years to come. Whether that's the right allocation for the budget, who knows? As ever, they did what they could, and they spent very small down payment on Jake O'Brien. But there are the elephants in the room, and I'm sure you were going to mention this as well, but with stats shown on Sky Sports.
Well, you just can't ignore it, can you? Like it's
No, you can't. You can't. You
like as much as like I don't think he was horrendous. Like he was bad. He was bad on Saturday. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he was great against Bournemouth, but like I don't think he's been horrendous by any means until the game this weekend. And it feels like harsh to dig him out maybe at times. I think Tarkowski's been just as bad, to be fair. I don't think he's had a great start to the season at all. I don't think he's fully fit. Same with Mikolenko, obviously, he was ill at the weekend. But like you just can't ignore that, can you? Like, and the evidence is just so there. It is staring you in the face. We've conceded 13 goals to start the season. Like, it's got to reach a threshold, hasn't it? Where you've got to say, right, this is just not working. Like, whether it's just like the dynamics, like the distances, the relationship, like the way they communicate. Like, there's clearly something broken there between Tarkowski, Keane, or Tarkowski, Keane and the fullback, or Tarkowski, Keane and the goalkeeper. Like, something has got to change, hasn't it?
Do you not think central defensive partnerships are all, in my opinion, about complementary skill sets? So the reason why Tarkowski and Branthwaite worked so well, in my view, is because you've got Tarky as this old school stopper type, wins everything in the air, kicks everything that moves. He's obviously got more to his game than that, but that is the really rough caricature of James Tarkowski as a Premier League defender. Then you've got Branthwaite, who's obviously much quicker across the ground, good on his left foot, good at bringing the ball out. Covered Mikolenko so well in the channels, I thought, last season, and probably made Mikolenko look better as a result. So you're losing some of that, by the way, straight away. You're losing that chemistry between your two, that the compatibility. You're also losing that bit of assurance for Mikolenko before you even begin. And we've spoken there about Everton's lack of solidity, their inability to be compact in these areas. But when you've got Morgan Rogers and Jacob Ramsey and Ollie Watkins running into the channels, you really sorely miss Jared Branthwaite, don't you? I mean, I jotted down the stats earlier because I saw the graphic on social media from Sky Sports' coverage of Saturday's game, and the numbers are just mad. So, like, Tarkowski and Keane have played together 7 times since the start of last season, and Everton have only won once in those 7 games, and they've conceded 2.6 goals on average in those games. That, when you flip it and it becomes Tarkowski and Branthwaite, that 2.6 goals per game is halved. It becomes 1.3. And Everton's win ratio goes from 14% to 34%. So nearly tripled. So you can see there in those raw numbers, and data doesn't tell us everything, but in those raw numbers, there is a compelling case for something other than a Tarkowski and Keane partnership.
And I think as well, just to jump in there, I think I'm right in saying this. People might correct me if I'm wrong. The one win in that would have been Burnley away, which was our last away win in the Premier League, wasn't it? Where we played a back 3 because Branthwaite was out injured. I think Godfrey came in, didn't he? And Keane played with Tarkowski, and we played wing backs. So it wasn't a Keane and Tarkowski centre back duo necessarily. He changed the system, and we won that night. So they haven't won playing in a back 2 together at all in that time.
No, and I think where they really struggled on Saturday, obviously, was in that movement aspect, that inability to track runners moving at high speed and with really intelligent movement, to be fair to both Rodgers and Watkins. They were taking up great spaces, and Everton couldn't really live with them, to be honest. They just didn't have the speed across the back line, to be honest, to live with them. And I think we saw a little bit of that, didn't we, with the second goal where Jack Harrison, I think Luca Dean's offside, by the way, if Harrison doesn't connect the ball. But Harrison is scrambling to chase back, just can't get there, and then inadvertently makes a mistake that gives Watkins Villa's equaliser. The first goal is probably the one that will concern Dyche most, though, because he would back his teams to defend that ball to the back post every day. But Everton have been really vulnerable there, and Watkins has obviously got the run on Keane, but Keane doesn't cover himself in glory. Like most people would have expected him, I think, to clear that, given that there's a big height difference between the two.
Watching it back, it wasn't like I thought when I watched it in real time that he had more of a run on him than he did. It's only like a couple of steps. It's not like a 4 or 5 step and leap. It's I think Keane just times his jump wrong ultimately, and Watkins doesn't. And
I think,
he
I think it's obviously much harder to jump from a standing start, isn't it? And as a result, Watkins gets the leap on him. Keane's probably not aware, and then just loses that tussle in the air. But they're probably the things that it'd be very easy for fans then to say, I don't think Jared Branthwaite loses that ball at the back post, and I don't think Jake O'Brien loses that ball at the back post, because they're bigger still. I just think the balance is wrong, and I don't want it to be all about Michael Keane. I don't think that's fair, to be honest.
No, it's not.
I don't think the balance is wrong. What I'm talking about here is that if you ranked all of Everton's partnerships on how well you think they would work together, I think Tarkowski and Keane's probably at the bottom, and that's partly because of what Tarkowski can't do as well. By the way, it's not just Keane, but I think the two of them together, they're just a bit too slow. They're just a bit too immobile. They both kind of want to do the same thing, and there's not enough of the other elements that, say, somebody like Branthwaite brings. So when you look at like where Everton can get the most in terms of gains from any one change, it probably is at centre back, isn't it?
Yeah, it just gets to the point where I think they're conceding so many goals that you've got to try something different. Yeah. Like you said, don't lie. We'll finish off very quickly with the last point, Paddy, because we've gone on for a while there. Got really stuck into that game. In short, is John Textor, or does John Textor just need to be quiet for a little bit? Because that statement Everton put out last week on Thursday, which meant that the press conference was delayed for 15 minutes. Speaking to my colleague Joe Thomas, everyone was handed a piece of paper beforehand, just with this statement on. I don't know why it couldn't have just gone out in the morning or something like that. Don't get me wrong, but Everton, being dramatic as they are, handed a piece of paper out to the journalists 15 minutes before Dyche was due to start. The press conference was delayed, and effectively Everton told them to shut up for a bit, haven't they? Because you've been doing a lot of talking, and maybe given the club have not officially announced any period of exclusivity or anything yet, they're a bit uneasy maybe about how openly he's talking about this takeover and the way in which he's going. And do you know what? I do get it, because it's kind of making my teeth itch a little bit, given what's been going on with all potential buyers over the last few years. It's kind of case, don't say anything until it's done, because we've been down this path before.
Yeah, it's become very public. I mean, we know from the interview Textor did with Sky Sports, I think it was on Thursday or Friday, must have been Thursday actually, that he believes he has some form of agreement with Moshiri over talks, some form of structure to those talks. I don't think it can actually be classed in technical terms as exclusivity, because he's still a shareholder with another club, but it is something akin to exclusivity without the exact name. I mean, he did say, didn't he, that because of his Palace situation, he is aware that others might be interested and others might gazump him, I think is the word he used. This might sound really perverse, Matt, as a journalist and somebody who obviously craves information about what's going on at the club, but I think it has been too public. I do, and there's lots of noise around the takeover situation, and then Everton having to come out and effectively distance themselves from some of what he said. And what I took from that statement was, A, there's loads of talk around this, but it's not as close as you think, and we'll issue an update when there is. And then B, please don't attribute some of what he's saying as being a club perspective, because he's not the owner of the club right now. And I think, I don't know how that interview with Sky came about, or how the questions, for example, were framed and phrased. Whether, for example, when Alan Myers did the interview with him, as everyone knows, Alan Myers did the interview, whether he prompted Textor in that chat on Dyche's future, for example. But we shouldn't really, if you unpick it, we shouldn't really have a situation where a prospective owner of the football club, but somebody who is still nowhere near the levers of power, is commenting openly on the manager's position. I mean, if you're advising him as a PR guy, you probably just say, I'm not the owner of the football club right now. Sean Dyche is doing a good job, but we'll discuss these big issues as and when I take over the club, and that can be the end of it. But to get into that territory where kind of he's commenting on whether Sean Dyche wants strikers from Botafogo and the Brazilian league and whether he wants to work with those kind of players, to me it seemed like he was almost kind of overstepping his mark a little bit. We know there's still quite a way to go here. We know this isn't a done deal. We know there's still loads of hurdles for Textor to overcome. So I quite like to just see them get on with that and see what comes of that, rather than this constant stream of stuff. Again, I realise the irony. I work in media. I get it, but the constant stream of stories, I don't think it's particularly helpful. I mean, I don't know. What was your perspective on it?
No, I think like the thing that made me so excited about the Freaking Group was just how like quiet it was, and it felt very professional. Like speaking to people who worked in the industry, a lot about the finance of football. Like it all seemed like to be just slowly, going on behind the scenes until obviously it just wasn't anymore. And I'm being honest, like the stuff he said so far has reminded me of Mashiri and Josh Wonder. Like it's kind of like of that same bracket, isn't it? Where they're just coming out and just being a bit too open and a bit too honest about things, and maybe, like you said, overstepping the brief. And like, listen, it was a great interview, and some of the line about him rather being Everton owner than president of the United States was, an absolute zinger, wasn't it? It's absolutely fantastic getting that. But that wasn't the only media thing he did that day. He was speaking at a press conference in France, wasn't he? Where he kind of, he went a bit viral for getting his sums wrong. And then earlier in the week, I think one of my colleagues, Chris Beasley, found some quotes from a press conference he did in Brazil talking about links to the Palmeiras manager taking over from Sean Dyche. It feels like one of them where he's talking about something different every day, and it's that classic thing, isn't it? Like that's inbuilt in you. And the thing that we'd say about signing sometimes, you don't believe it's done until you see them holding up the shirt with the name on, or they're out on the pitch playing for your team. And we've had people over the past few months sat in the director's box at Goodison Park on multiple occasions, putting statements out on the club website, and they've still not taken over the club. And they've ultimately left the club with a bit of a millstone around the neck. So I think maybe a bit more sensitivity from his point of view, maybe appreciating that. And listen, I'm sure a lot of people might, obviously don't work in the same industries as us, maybe have a different view on it. We're probably quite happy to hear what his plans were, feeling upbeat. But I think from our point of view, like when you see one person talking to about 5 or 6 different outlets in the space of 3 or 4 days about different things through Everton, and they're not in a period of exclusivity, nowhere near being the owner, it does make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, I think.
I think so. And look, this is quite a difficult one because we all want owners or prospective owners to communicate about their plans for our clubs. We all want that. And to an extent, if Textor continues to do that on becoming Everton owner, should he become Everton owner, then he should be applauded for that. I think we have to be careful because there should be a really high bar now when it comes to assessing Everton owners and whether they are suitable as incumbents for the football club. And quite a lot of what Textor said in that interview sounded quite nice. It was the comment about Everton being akin to becoming the president of the United States, the comment about loving Goodison. Slightly bizarre, actually, when Everton are about to move into a new stadium, that he would effectively use to leverage money, more cash for Everton, in theory. But when you break down some of it substantially, what did we actually get? Beyond some comments about Sean Dyche and beyond wanting to make Everton great again, which is lovely. I want Everton.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Well, maybe it was said quite deliberately, and flippantly. But I mean, how? For starters, like one of the big things that for me was, right, you want Everton to compete for trophies. We all do. That would be lovely, and I hope you bring that if you take over. But how are you planning to do that? Like, there's no There was nothing below the kind of the very surface level stuff, was there? It was all chat GBT stuff to me. to be frank, with a bit of extra insight, to be fair to him. But like, what's the plan? How's it going to work with? I mean, he spoke a little bit about Palace shares, in fairness to him. How long is it going to take, in theory? What does the funding of Everton look like, and is he involved in that funding in that period before taking over?
But I think he said, actually, I can't remember if it was in that interview or one of the other ones he did, like it would be equity entirely. It wouldn't be just...
He said it would be full equity for the takeover. But just like how, when, like, what's the plan? We still don't know any of that detail, where the money is coming from, how much he has and how much is going to come from other investors. Again, we've heard something on some of the potential partners, and we've seen some media stories on some of the potential partners. But it's all, to me, it's all a little bit thin at the moment. And I think we should be really careful, going back to that point about high bar for Everton and new owners and incumbents. I think we have a duty, certainly as journalists, not to just get completely attached to this idea of he thinks Everton should be competing for trophies again. Because every new owner should think that, really, in time. It should all be about whether these plans are viable. And also assessing his record at Lyon. How are Lyon doing? What do the fans at Lyon make of him? What is his transfer policy like? How much does he delegate to football people? Or how much does he pull rank? As we've seen with Mashiri before in the past, over manager hires and player transfers. We kind of don't know any of that right now beyond what we can glean from Lyon and Molenbeek, his Belgian club.
It's whether we even need to know that yet, because like you said, he's so far away from it. It's like it's still so much work to do before he gets near taking over the club. You know, like we said, he's still effectively the owner of one of our rivals as things stand. So,
but what I'm saying is, we need to hear that stuff before we go, oh great, I really want John Textor at Everton.
Yeah.
Everton need a new owner, in theory. We all know Everton need a new owner. They've been trying to find a new owner. Farhad Mashiri's been trying to find a way out. There have been multiple botched takeover bids. And clearly there is a need for something new and something different and something more. An injection of cash and new ideas into the club. So that's something everyone can get on board with.
Yeah.
But we need to see the plan, and we need to hear the plan. And it's still very early. And I think that goes back to Everton's statement, doesn't it? It's still very early here. And we don't really want to get into a territory where a potential new owner is giving us a running commentary on what he thinks of Sean Dyche's position, because that adds to the circus.
Yeah.
What he thinks of, for example, Vitaly Mikalenko's performance at left back one week to another. That can wait. It can wait, John. Yeah. It can really wait. We don't need to hear it right now.
The thing I'll say, Paddy, is that if he's listening to this and wants to come on the show, we take all this back. He can come and have a chat with us anytime. John, if you're listening, make the Everton byline great if you want. That'll be wonderful. But yeah, we'll wrap it up. Going across the bottom of the screen there, if you're watching on YouTube, is Textor talking too much. People probably think we've been talking too much because we've been going 15 minutes this week. But loads to get into. Really enjoyable chat, even in the wake of a 3-2 defeat. Obviously, we've got Southampton tomorrow. There'll be an instant reaction podcast after that. We'll also have the weekly. And Blue Monday, by the way, will be out on Tuesday this week. So if you listen to this on Monday, we've been pushed forward. Blue Monday's going to be Tuesday. Dave and Les just getting the schedules sorted there. So yeah, but do leave us a comment. Do leave us a review. All these things help. Keep your feedback coming in on this show, on all your thoughts, what's going on with Everton at the moment. And we'll keep churning these out as the weeks go on. Cheers to Paddy. That's been your Everton Byline.